The soldiers' betrayal and isolation. The battlefield was silent now, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that made Alex's skin crawl. He crouched behind a jagged rock, scanning the endless stretch of barren land around him. His armor, once polished and proud, was now covered in grime and blood. The communicator in his helmet buzzed faintly, useless static. No help was coming. He was utterly alone. It hadn't always been like this. Just a week ago, Alex was part of an elite human squad sent to this alien planet on a mission of exploration. But something had gone wrong. The mission turned into a fight for survival when they encountered hostile alien forces. At first, the squad stuck together, fighting as a team. But when supplies ran low and tensions rose, everything fell apart. "They'll come for you later," Sergeant Drake had said, his voice cold and calculating. But Alex had seen the truth in their eyes. They weren't coming back. His squad had abandoned him, leaving him to die on this hostile planet. Now, as Alex looked at the cracked horizon, he felt the sting of betrayal like a fresh wound. His stomach growled painfully. It had been 2 days since his last meal, and his water supply was almost gone. He tried to push the hunger aside, focusing on the basics: survive, move, and don't get caught. The planet was a harsh wasteland, its red skies casting an eerie glow over the jagged terrain. Razor-sharp winds whipped across the desert, cutting through his armor and chilling him to the bone. Every step felt like a battle against the planet itself. As the sun dipped lower, Alex knew he needed to find shelter. The nights here were even worse than the days, with freezing temperatures and predators that hunted in the dark. He spotted a cluster of rocks in the distance that might offer some cover. His legs burned as he forced himself to keep moving, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands. Reaching the rocks, Alex collapsed against one of them, panting heavily. His mind wandered to his squad, the people he had trusted with his life. He couldn't understand how they could leave him like this. Was he so disposable? Did his life mean so little to them? As darkness began to fall, Alex activated his visor's night vision. The eerie green glow revealed the barren landscape, but something in the distance caught his attention, a faint flicker of light. It was small, like a fire or a damaged ship's signal flare. For a moment, hope surged through him. Maybe it was another human. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. Cautiously, Alex made his way toward the light. The closer he got, the more he realized it wasn't just a fire. It was the wreckage of an alien ship. The jagged hull jutted out of the ground like the bones of some massive creature, its metallic surface scorched and twisted. Alex's heart raced. A crash site meant one of two things: danger or opportunity. He adjusted his rifle, scanning for any movement. The wreckage was eerily quiet, save for the occasional crackle of flames. He stepped closer, his boots crunching against the dirt. Then he heard it, a faint sound like a groan. His body tensed, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he couldn't ignore it. Against his better judgment, Alex followed the sound, stepping into the shadows of the wreckage. What he found stopped him in his tracks. Lying beneath a pile of debris was an alien, tall, with silvery blue skin and intricate markings running along its arms and face. Its armor was shattered, and its legs were pinned under a massive metal beam. The alien's eyes, a piercing shade of violet, locked onto Alex. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Alex's finger hovered over the trigger of his rifle. This alien could be one of the enemy, a warrior from the same race that had attacked his squad. Yet, as he looked closer, he saw the pain etched on its face. This alien wasn't a threat. It was helpless, trapped, and on the brink of death. "Help, me," the alien rasped, its voice weak but clear. Alex froze. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He knew what he should do: walk away, leave it to die. Helping this alien could be a death sentence for him. He had barely enough supplies to keep himself alive, let alone someone else. But as he stood there, staring at the creature before him, A flicker of something stirred within him. Compassion. Duty. Or maybe just a stubborn refusal to let someone else die when he could do something about it. He lowered his rifle and knelt beside the alien. "Stay still," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. He didn't know if it understood him, but it didn't matter. He started pulling away the debris, his muscles straining with the effort. The alien winced in pain, but didn't cry out. Alex worked quickly, his mind racing. What was he doing? Why was he risking his life for an alien he didn't know? When he finally freed the alien's legs, he saw the extent of its injuries. Its legs were mangled, useless. It wouldn't be walking anytime soon. Alex sat back, breathing heavily. The alien looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Was it gratitude? Suspicion? "You better not make me regret this," Alex muttered under his breath. The alien didn't respond, but its eyes remained locked on him. The silence between them was thick with unspoken tension. Alex didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: his fight for survival had just gotten a lot more complicated. The alien's desperate plea. The silence between them stretched, heavy and tense. Alex stared at the alien, unsure if he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Its violet eyes shimmered faintly in the dim light, locked onto him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "I didn't think your kind believed in mercy," the alien said suddenly, its voice rough, yet laced with something unspoken: vulnerability. Alex blinked, startled. The words weren't just clear, they were in his language. His grip on his rifle tightened reflexively. "You speak English." The alien coughed, a sound that rattled deep in its chest. "Our war commanders studied you. Studied all of you." It paused, its gaze hardening. "But studying doesn't prepare you for this. Pain." Alex frowned, unsure how to respond. His instinct told him to keep moving. Leave this wreck behind. He couldn't afford the weight of another life on his shoulders, not after what his squad had done to him. But something in the alien's tone stopped him. It wasn't just asking for help. It was almost begging. "What happened to you?" Alex asked, his voice sharp but curious. The alien hesitated, its pride clearly warring with its need for survival. Finally, it spoke. "Betrayal. A coward's strike from within my own ranks. My ship, my honor, destroyed by those I once called kin." Alex froze. The word betrayal hit like a hammer. He knew that sting all too well. "I get it," Alex said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I know what it's like to be left behind." For a moment, there was silence again, but this time, it felt different, less like a void and more like an understanding. The alien's eyes softened, just slightly, as if recognizing something in him. "I am Kel," it said finally, the name rolling off its tongue like a declaration. "Once a warrior of the Valkyrian elite." "Alex," he replied. "Once part of an elite human squad. Now, just a guy trying to survive." Cal's lips curled into what might have been a smirk, but it was fleeting. "Survival is relative. I am dying. Human." Alex felt a lump rise in his throat. He looked at Cal's legs, mangled and useless, and realized the truth of her words. Without immediate help, she wouldn't last another day. "You don't have to die," Alex said, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. Cal let out a bitter laugh, but it quickly turned into a painful wheeze. "You cannot save me. Your supplies won't last, and I am nothing but dead weight. Leave me, human. Save yourself." Alex clenched his fists. Every logical part of him screamed to listen to her, to walk away. But another part, the part that had driven him to free her in the first place, refused to let go. "You're wrong," Alex said firmly. "You're not dead weight. You're alive. That means there's still a chance." Cal's eyes widened, just slightly. For the first time, she seemed genuinely taken aback. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why risk yourself for me?" Alex hesitated, struggling to find the words. Finally, he said, "Because I won't be like them. The ones who left me. The ones who left you. I'm not giving up on you, even if it's stupid." For a moment, Cal said nothing. Then, with visible effort, she extended a trembling hand toward him. "If you are to help me, human, then know this. I will owe you a debt, and my people do not take debts lightly." Alex took her hand, gripping it firmly. "Then let's make sure you live long enough to repay it." The faintest hint of a smile crossed Cal's lips before she slumped back, her energy spent. Alex's chest tightened. He had just made a choice that could cost him everything. But as he looked at the broken alien warrior before him, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger. Something worth fighting for. A fragile alliance. Alex grunted as he dragged Cal across the rocky terrain, her tall, armored frame far heavier than he'd expected. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but he kept moving, step by agonizing step. The alien warrior was barely conscious, her breaths shallow and ragged. "You humans are weaker than I thought," Cal muttered, her voice faint, but laced with dry humor. Alex paused, glaring down at her. "And you aliens talk too much for people who can't even stand." Cal's lips twitched into the ghost of a smirk, but the moment passed quickly, replaced by a grimace of pain. Alex sighed, adjusting his grip on her shoulders. "Look, if you want to survive, save the sarcasm," he said. "I'm risking my neck here for someone who could have just as easily been shooting at me a week ago." Cal's violet eyes flicked to him, their intensity undiminished despite her weakened state. "You think I'm your enemy," she rasped. "Aren't you?" Alex shot back, glancing over his shoulder. The wreckage of her ship was barely visible now, a jagged silhouette against the crimson horizon. He knew they didn't have much time. The desert nights were unforgiving, and predators weren't the only things lurking out there. Cal let out a weak chuckle, though it sounded more like a cough. "If I were your enemy, you'd already be dead." "That's comforting," Alex muttered under his breath, his boots crunching against the loose gravel. They reached a small outcropping of rocks, a makeshift shelter at best, but it would have to do. Alex carefully set Cal down, propping her against a large boulder. She winced but didn't complain, her pride clearly stronger than her pain. "Stay here," Alex said, grabbing his rifle and scanning the area. The sun was setting fast, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. "I'll find something to cover us before the temperature drops." As he moved away, Cal's voice stopped him. "Why do you do this, human?" she asked, her tone more curious than accusatory. Alex hesitated, glancing back at her. "Do what?" "Risk yourself for someone you owe nothing to. Someone who cannot repay you." Alex didn't answer immediately. He stared at her, his jaw tightening as memories of his squad's betrayal flashed through his mind. Finally, he said, "Because I'm not like the people who left me behind. I don't abandon others just because it's convenient." Cal's expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "You are strange," she murmured, almost to herself. Alex shrugged. "You're not the first to say that." He disappeared into the shadows, leaving Cal alone with her thoughts. For the first time in a long while, the proud Valkyrian warrior felt something unfamiliar: gratitude. As the night deepened, Alex returned with a collection of scavenged materials, a torn tarp, pieces of metal, and dried brushwood. He worked quickly, setting up a crude shelter and starting a small fire. The warmth was a welcome reprieve from the biting cold that had begun to settle in. Cal watched him silently, her violet eyes following his every move. "You're resourceful," she said finally. "Comes with the territory," Alex replied without looking at her. He was focused on the fire, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. "You could survive alone," Cal continued. "You don't need me." Alex looked up, his gaze sharp. "No, I don't. But that doesn't mean I'll leave you." Kale tilted her head, studying him. Humans, you are full of contradictions. And you aliens aren't. Alex shot back, smirking. Kale didn't respond immediately. Instead, she shifted slightly, wincing as she adjusted her position. You're different from the others I've encountered, she admitted. Less arrogant. High praise coming from someone who called me weak an hour ago, Alex said, leaning back against the rock. Kale's lips quirked upward again, but this time, the faint smile lingered. Perhaps I judged too quickly. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows on the rocks. For a moment, the harshness of the desert seemed to fade, replaced by a fragile sense of camaraderie. But both of them knew it wouldn't last. We can't stay here long, Alex said, breaking the silence. Something tells me whoever brought down your ship won't stop until they're sure you're dead. Cal's expression darkened. You're right. They'll come. Alex tightened his grip on his rifle. Then we'll be ready. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that neither of them could ignore. For better or worse, their fates were now tied together, and neither of them was willing to let the other fall. Survival against the odds. The cold winds howled through the rocky outcrop, carrying with them the promise of danger. Alex crouched beside the small fire, its warmth barely pushing back the encroaching chill of the alien night. Across from him, Kale sat upright, her face pale but resolute. Her injuries hadn't stopped her sharp eyes from scanning the darkness like a predator sensing its hunter. We can't stay here long, Alex said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but his tone carried an urgency that made Cal glance at him. No, she agreed, but moving with me in this condition will slow you down. Alex shot her a look. I thought we covered this already. I'm not leaving you behind. Cal's jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration crossing her face. Your loyalty is admirable, human, but it is also foolish. The predators of this world do not pity the weak. Good thing we're not weak. Alex shot back, standing and checking his rifle. And if something tries to come after us, it'll learn it the hard way. Kale didn't reply, but her gaze lingered on Alex longer than usual. She had underestimated him once. She wouldn't make the same mistake again. As dawn broke, they began their journey. Kale leaned heavily on a makeshift crutch Alex had fashioned from salvaged metal and wood. Each step was a struggle, but her determination burned brighter than her pain. The terrain was merciless. Jagged rocks, deep crevices, and stretches of barren wasteland with no cover. The sun blazed overhead, turning the air into a stifling furnace. Alex stopped to share his water ration with Kale. Drink, he said, holding the bottle out to her. Kale hesitated. You need it more than I do. Just take it. Alex insisted. I'll find more. Kale accepted it reluctantly, her pride warring with her need. She took a small sip before handing it back. You're stubborn, she muttered. You're just figuring that out now. Alex replied with a smirk, shouldering his pack. By midday, they reached a dried riverbed. Alex knelt, inspecting the cracked soil. This could lead us to water, he said, his voice tinged with hope. Kale nodded. If the river still flows beneath, we might survive another day. They followed the river for miles, their progress slow but steady. The oppressive heat bore down on them, sapping their strength. Alex kept scanning the horizon, his rifle at the ready. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic clicking sound. Stop, he whispered, holding up a hand. Kale froze, her sharp eyes narrowing. What is it? Something's watching us, Alex murmured, his heart pounding. The clicking grew louder, echoing off the rocks. It was followed by a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down Alex's spine. He gripped his rifle tighter, positioning himself between Kale and the sound. From the shadows of a nearby crevice, a creature emerged. It was unlike anything Alex had ever seen, its sinewy body covered in scales that shimmered like liquid metal. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its claws scraped against the rocks as it advanced. Kel's voice was calm but firm. A Schattenbeast. It hunts in the shadows, waiting for its prey to weaken before it strikes. Great, Alex muttered. Any tips on how to kill it? Don't miss, Kel replied dryly. The creature lunged, its movements eerily fluid. Alex fired, the sound of his rifle cracking through the air. The shot hit the beast's shoulder, but it barely flinched, its glowing eyes fixed on him. Kel grabbed a jagged rock, her movements sluggish but determined. Aim for its neck, she called out. The creature leaped again, faster this time. Alex dodged, rolling to the side and firing another shot. This one struck the beast's neck, and it let out a piercing screech, stumbling back. Kel seized the opportunity, hurling the rock with surprising precision. It struck the creature's head, and it collapsed with a final, guttural growl. Breathing heavily, Alex approached the creature cautiously, his rifle trained on it. When it didn't move, he lowered his weapon and glanced at Kel. "Remind me to never underestimate you," he said, offering her a hand to steady herself. Kel smirked faintly, though her exhaustion was evident. "You're learning." As they moved away from the river, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the Schattenbeast wasn't the only threat lurking in the shadows. Kel's injuries and the constant danger made their survival feel like a fragile thread, ready to snap at any moment. But as they pressed on, something had changed between them. The fragile alliance was solidifying into something stronger. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were fighting for each other, and neither of them was ready to give up. The enemy revealed. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. Alex and Kel trudged forward, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. Every step felt like a victory against the unforgiving environment. But Alex couldn't shake the nagging feeling crawling up his spine. "Someone's watching us," he muttered under his breath, gripping his rifle tightly. Kel's eyes narrowed. Even in her weakened state, her instincts were razor sharp. "I feel it too," she said softly. "They found me." Alex stopped dead in his tracks. "Who's they?" Kel leaned against her makeshift crutch, her expression darkening. "The mercenaries. My people hired them to ensure I never return. To them, I am a threat. An inconvenient reminder of what they fear." "Great," Alex muttered, scanning the horizon. "So not only do we have to deal with alien predators, but now we've got professional killers on our trail. Fantastic." Kel gave a faint, humorless smile. "Welcome to my life, human." The attack came at dusk. A high-pitched whine cut through the air. A drone, small but deadly, buzzing just above the ridge. Alex dropped to one knee, motioning for Kel to stay low. "It's scouting us," Kel said, her voice grim. "No kidding," Alex replied, taking aim. With a sharp exhale, he fired, the bullet striking the drone dead center. It exploded in a shower of sparks, the sound echoing across the barren land. "That'll bring them running," Kel said, her tone warning. "Then we set the trap," Alex replied, already moving toward a cluster of jagged rocks that offered some semblance of cover. Kel followed, her movements slow but determined. "You think you can take on trained killers, human?" Alex glanced at her, a glint of defiance in his eyes. "I don't think. I know." Minutes later, the first mercenary appeared, clad in sleek black armor that blended seamlessly with the shadows. Alex stayed perfectly still, his breathing controlled as he lay in wait. Kel was hidden a few feet away, her silvery skin blending with the rocks. Despite her injuries, her grip on the jagged blade Alex had fashioned for her was steady. The mercenary moved closer, scanning the area with his sophisticated visor. Alex let him get just close enough before striking. With a swift motion, Alex fired, his bullet piercing the mercenary's chest plate. The figure crumpled silently to the ground. "That's one," Alex whispered, already moving to a new position. The retaliation was swift. More mercenaries emerged, their weapons blazing with energy rounds that lit up the darkening sky. Alex ducked behind cover, returning fire in calculated bursts. Kale joined the fray, her blade catching one mercenary off guard. Despite her injuries, she moved with a fluidity that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. "You fight well for someone half dead," Alex called out, reloading his rifle. Kale smirked, even as she blocked an incoming strike. "And you shoot well for someone who talks too much." The battle was brutal and relentless. Alex's heart pounded as he fought to protect both himself and Kale. The mercenaries were skilled, their tactics precise, but Alex's military training and Cal's raw determination proved to be an unexpected advantage. In the chaos, one mercenary managed to pin Alex against a rock, his energy blade humming dangerously close to Alex's throat. "You should have stayed out of this, human," the mercenary growled. "Yeah, well, I've got a habit of bad decisions," Alex shot back, grabbing a jagged piece of rock and driving it into the mercenary's side. The mercenary staggered, giving Alex just enough time to deliver a finishing blow. By the time the last mercenary fell, the makeshift battlefield was silent again. Alex collapsed against a rock, his chest heaving. Kale limped over to him, blood streaking her face, but her eyes sharp and unwavering. "You're still alive," she said, almost in disbelief. "So are you," Alex replied, managing a weak smile. Kale extended a hand, pulling him to his feet. "We won't get this lucky again. They'll send more." "I figured," Alex said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "But for now, we're still standing. That's what matters." Kale looked at him, something unspoken passing between them. For the first time, she saw Alex not as a liability, but as an equal. "We make a good team, human," she said softly. Alex smirked. "Took you long enough to figure that out." The selfless act. The quiet after the battle was deafening. The sky, once alive with the glow of energy rounds, now stretched in dark, oppressive silence. Alex leaned heavily against a jagged rock, his hand pressed against a deep gash in his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, warm and unrelenting. "You're hurt," Kale said, her voice sharp with concern. "Nothing I can't walk off," Alex muttered, though his pale face and unsteady stance betrayed his words. Kale knelt beside him, her injuries momentarily forgotten. Her violet eyes scanned his wound with the precision of a warrior assessing the battlefield. "The blade nicked an artery," she said grimly. "You'll bleed out if we don't stop it." Alex chuckled weakly, the sound bitter. "Well, that's one way to go." Cal's expression darkened, her jaw tightening. "You saved me, human. I will not let you die." Kale tore a strip from her damaged armor, improvising a crude tourniquet. Her hands, usually steady, trembled as she worked to stop the bleeding. Alex winced but didn't protest, his energy waning by the second. "You've got to keep moving," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Find a safe place. I'll catch up." Kale froze, her gaze snapping to his. "Do not insult me with such nonsense. I am Valkyran. We do not abandon those who fight for us." Alex managed a faint smile. "Funny. I could have sworn you told me to leave you behind not too long ago." Kale ignored him, her focus unwavering. "Stay still," she ordered. "If you waste your energy on jokes, I'll leave you unconscious." With the bleeding slowed, Kale stood, her stance unsteady but resolute. "We need to move. The mercenaries will send reinforcements." "You're in no shape to carry me," Alex said, his tone equal parts humor and resignation. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Do not underestimate me, human." Before Alex could protest, she leaned down and hoisted him onto her shoulders. Despite her injuries, she carried him with the determination of someone who had faced death countless times and refused to lose another battle. "Cal, you're going to get yourself killed," Alex muttered, his head lolling against her back. "Then I'll die with honor," she replied, her voice like steel. Every step was agony for Kale, but she pressed on, her pride and sheer willpower driving her forward. The landscape blurred together, rocks, sand, and the endless crimson sky. Each breath felt like fire in her lungs, but she refused to stop. Alex, barely conscious, managed to whisper, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Cale didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "Because you showed me mercy when you didn't have to. Because you reminded me what it means to fight for more than survival." As night fell, Cale spotted a faint glow in the distance, a hidden outpost, its lights barely visible against the rocky terrain. Her heart surged with a mix of relief and desperation. She pushed herself harder, her vision blurring as exhaustion threatened to overtake her. By the time she reached the outpost, her legs buckled, and she collapsed to her knees, still holding Alex. The guards, startled by her sudden appearance, aimed their weapons. "Identify yourself," one of them barked. Cale raised her head, her voice hoarse but commanding. "I am Kel of the Valkyrian elite. This human is under my protection. He needs immediate medical attention." The guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Cal's gaze hardened. "Now," she growled, the authority in her tone brooking no argument. Moments later, Alex was whisked away to a medical bay. Cal slumped against the wall, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. As the medics worked on Alex, she closed her eyes, her mind replaying the moment he had risked everything to save her. She had owed him a debt, and she had repaid it in kind. But as she sat there, battered and broken, she realized something profound. This wasn't about debts anymore. This was about honor, trust, and a bond forged in the fires of battle. And for the first time in years, Cale felt something she thought she had lost long ago. Hope, redemption, and honor. The sterile light of the medical bay buzzed faintly, casting a cold glow over Alex's unconscious form. Tubes ran from his arm, feeding him a cocktail of nutrients and medications. His chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm, the only sign that life still clung to him. Cale stood silently by his side, her tall frame rigid despite the bandages wrapped around her injuries. She had refused medical attention until Alex was stable. The outpost's medics had argued, but a single glare from her violet eyes silenced any protests. Her people would have called her weak for this, for prioritizing another life over her own. But as Cale looked at the human who had risked everything to save her, she felt no shame. "I do not know why you chose me," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you have shown me what my own people could not. That strength is more than power. It is loyalty. Sacrifice." Hours passed before Alex finally stirred. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. When his gaze landed on Cale, he managed a weak smile. "Still here," he croaked, his voice hoarse but tinged with humor. Cale's expression softened, a rare smile ghosting across her lips. "I could say the same to you, human." "Name's Alex," he corrected, shifting slightly in bed. Pain flashed across his face, but he ignored it. "You didn't leave me behind, did you?" Cale tilted her head. "Do you truly think so little of me?" Alex chuckled weakly. "No. I think a lot of you, actually." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, a shared understanding passing between them. The door to the medical bay slid open, and a Valkyrian officer stepped inside. His armor gleamed, the intricate markings on his chest plate denoting high rank. His gaze swept over Cale and Alex, his expression unreadable. "Cal of the Valkyrian elite," he said, his voice formal. "You have been declared a traitor by the High Council. Yet here you stand, alive, and with a human no less." Cale stepped forward, her posture unwavering despite the accusation. "I am no traitor. I was betrayed by my own people, and this human saved me when no one else would." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You dishonor our kind by allying with an outsider." "No," Cale said firmly, her voice like steel. "He honors what we have forgotten: courage, loyalty, and the strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Alex, still lying in the medical bed, raised a hand weakly. Appreciate the defense, but can we save the speeches until after I'm patched up? The officer's gaze flicked to Alex, a flicker of something. Respect, perhaps, crossing his face. Your actions have earned you my consideration, human, but do not mistake this for acceptance. Kale stepped closer, her eyes blazing. He doesn't need your acceptance. He has mine. Later, as the officer left, Alex turned to Kale, his smile faint but genuine. Didn't know I'd get my own bodyguard out of this mess. Kale crossed her arms, her smirk faint. You are more than a soldier, Alex. You are my blood-bound ally now. A bond not even the High Council can break. Blood-bound? Alex asked, raising an eyebrow. Kale leaned down, her gaze intense. It means that from this day forward, your battles are mine, and mine are yours. We fight together, or not at all. Alex grinned. Well, that's one way to make friends. Kale straightened, her expression softening. Friends? Yes, that is what we are now. As the days passed, Alex recovered under Kale's watchful eye. Their bond, forged in battle and tempered by sacrifice, became unshakable. They were no longer just survivors. They were partners, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. And as they stood together, staring out at the vast, unforgiving landscape beyond the outpost, one thing was clear. Their fight wasn't over. It was just beginning.